Hey everyone, and welcome to my new series. So this series is going to be called JavaScript Quick Tips or JavaScript Pro Tips or something like that. I haven't really decided yet, but essentially each video is going to be a deep dive into usually lesser known but incredibly powerful features of JavaScript so that you can become a more productive and well-equipped developer. In this pilot episode, we're going to look at the humble console log, which is perhaps one of the most commonly used parts of JavaScript, but a part that has many more features than you may have expected. So let's jump in. Okay, so the first feature of the console we're going to look at is the console log itself. So the console log, we of course would write console.log, and then you can pass anything into it you want. Could be a string, an array, an object, whatever. But we're just going to pass a basic string, let's say hello world. When we save this and go to our browser, into the DevTools and to the console tab, we see our output right here. Now there's actually many other features of the console log, including changing how this looks. You can make this stand out, you can add stack traces, all kinds of really useful advanced features. Now the first one is if you're outputting a dynamic variable, let's say. So if we go up here, create a constant of first name, assign it to James. To output this to the console, we would of course take this variable and put it into our parameters here, because we want to output whatever first name is. Let's say it came from an API, or we don't know what it is, or we're just trying to debug here. We go to our console and we of course get that output. Now if we have several different console logs, just having a variable output may get confusing. You may forget what this is in reference to, what variable you're outputting. So what you can actually do is you can pass two parameters into a console log, and the first one can be some sort of reference to it. So you could just put in here, this is the first name, just as a string there. And then the second parameter is the actual dynamic variable. Now when we save and refresh, we'll see that it's identified as first name, and then we actually see that dynamic variable. Now one other thing you can do here, which I'm not going to go into too much detail on, it's kind of a fun thing, but you can actually style this text to make it look cool, make it bigger. There's some websites that do this to tell you to not use the DevTools because it could hack the site or something. But essentially the way you do this is by prepending the string with %C. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean this up a bit here. I'm just going to delete this dynamic stuff and just leave a string in our console log here. And before this string, we're just going to prepend it with %C. And what this lets us do now is have a second parameter. And in our second parameter, we can kind of provide some basic CSS. So essentially, we can just say color blue, and if we save and refresh, we'll actually be able to color this. There's all kinds of things you can do, font sizes and bold and all these other things. But yeah, if you want to have some fun, look it up. It is a built-in function of console log. Now some much more useful parts of console log are the console.warn and console.error variants. Now what these let you do is highlight the console log in your console here, and also provide a stack trace, which can be really useful for pointing out certain errors or certain warnings, and it can also help you debug. So let me show you. Let's remove this console log here. Let's just put back, hello world, and let's copy this one down. And let's change this .log to .warn. Now if we save and refresh, we'll see that our console log has gone in this yellow color, which can help it stand out, and you'll see libraries use this technique quite a lot. But what this also gives you is this little triangle here, where you can see a stack trace. So console.warnings are really useful if you are trying to figure out something that's going wrong with your application. Not that it's crashing, but you just want to know where the call's happening, and it can help you debug it. And also, of course, that benefit of it standing out. Now the same thing happens here with console.error, which is functionally exactly the same, but it goes red instead of orange. And again, you'll see libraries like React do this. If you do something wrong in their library, they will point it out with a error in the console here. And again, you get a stack trace. So super, super useful. Now the next feature is called console.table. Now this is very, very useful, and I use this myself quite a lot, so I definitely feel like it should be more well known. But essentially, whenever you have, let's say, an array like this is a simple array of objects, so const users, and then I have some objects here with some key value pairs for the users in my application, as you can see. If I was to go ahead and console log this to the browser, console log that users array, I would get something like this, which you can then open up, and then you can have a look at each one of these in their sort of object form. But generally they can get quite long, and they can get cut off, and sometimes you want to look at this information. It'd be really nice if you could sort it quickly, or see it all at a glance. Now this is exactly what console.table is for. Console.table allows you to display this array data in a table form. So instead of using console.log, we switch that to console.table. Now when we refresh, we actually get a table format, which you can go ahead and sort by clicking on the titles, and you can also see all your information at a glance, and none of it is cut off. Super, super useful. So the next feature is called console.group. So this is kind of cool, and I only just learned about it recently, but essentially it lets you group lists of console logs together, which can help clean up your browser debugging console, or if you're running lots of repeating console logs, it can really help you just organize your stuff. So let me show you. I have a for loop here that runs 100 times, and in each loop it just creates a random number between 0 and 100. And if I go to the console log in this state, you can see a list of 100 different numbers here. Now I want to be able to group these together so I can collapse it and get to my, maybe my other console logs or, whatever. So what I'm going to do at the top of here, I'm going to go ahead and run console.group. And what that does is it's going to group everything together from this point onwards. So any log after that point. To end group, you're going to go ahead and run console.group end. And what that will do is end that group so that anything you write after this will not be part of the group. Just like that. So if we go ahead and go back to our browser here, we'll see that our hello world is not within a group here at the bottom, and all the rest of our numbers are within this console.group here, which we can collapse and only look at when we want to. Now, one issue here you'll see is that this is open by default, which to be honest isn't very useful at all. So there's actually an alternative called GroupCollapsed with a capital C, just like that. And this works in the exact same way. It's still group end, but group collapsed means that whenever you run that, it's by default collapsed, which is really, really useful. Now this console.group collapse is kind of ugly, and if you're running multiple of these, then this can get kind of confusing. So you can actually name this group by simply putting in the name of the group into these parentheses here. So I'm going to call this for loop logs. Now you also have to add this name to the group end so that the console group knows which group it's ending, just like that. And now if we go back to our browser, we'll see that we've named our console group. Our second to last feature here is console.time. So this is really useful for performance testing, or if you're trying to debug a long-running function or something. So here's an interesting example. I have a for loop here that runs 100 million times, and in each loop it just adds on the number to itself, so it doubles the number of that current loop. And then we console log the output. Now this is quite a heavy function to run. So if I go to my browser and refresh, you'll see there's a couple of seconds or so that we have to wait for this result. Now, if this was real code that I'd written to actually do something useful, I'd want to know, how long this is running for, or maybe I'm just wondering why something's taking so long. So what I can do is I can go ahead and run console.time. So before all this code runs, I'm going to go ahead and run console.time. And after all this code is run, I'm going to run console.timeEnd, which is going to record the difference between these two functions running, and then this one is going to go and output that result. So if we go to our browser, we can see here that this function takes 1100 milliseconds to run, which can be really, really useful for debugging. The last thing you can do here is you can actually name this timer if you're making multiple timers, and this is done in the same way as the console group was done, which is by adding a parameter to both of these functions with the name of your timer. So I'm just going to call this loop timer, and make sure you enter it in both your opening console.time and your closing console.time. And whenever you refresh the page, you'll see there we go. We've called it loop timer. This is a really, really useful function for debugging. Okay, so that's going to be all for this video. I really hope you found these tips useful, and I hope they help you in your next development projects. Let me know down in the comments if you find any other cool JavaScript tips, and I'll see you next time.